He could feel the river's life force pulsing in his veins, and with it, the spirits of the water that had long protected Omire. They spoke to him, ancient and wise, guiding him in what he needed to do. Nadasi opened his eyes and looked at the water, no longer afraid. "Ovia," he whispered, "I am your son. Let the river flow again." As if in response, the heavens opened. Rain began to fall, not in the usual heavy torrents of a storm, but in a soft, steady shower that soaked the earth. The villagers, who had been watching in awe, felt the cool droplets on their skin, their hearts lifting with hope. But that was not all. Obina's mind raced as Amara's cold gaze bore into him. He knew that he had uncovered something dark, something that would incriminate her. But standing here, in the heart of the shrine, with Amara blocking his path, he also knew that he was in grave danger. "You've gone too far this time, Amara," Obina said, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "The village will turn against you when they learn what you've done." Amara's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with a sinister light. "And how do you plan to tell them when you won't leave the shrine alive?" Before Obina could react, Amara raised her hand, and a sudden gust of wind slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. The force of it left him breathless, his vision spinning. He clutched the bundle of herbs, knowing that this was the only proof he had, but he also knew that escaping with it would be nearly impossible if Amara had full control of her powers here. Amara stepped closer, her form darkened by the shadows cast by the flickering shrine torches. "Did you really think you could defeat me, Obina? Ovia's chosen priestess? You're no match for the powers I wield." Obina struggled to his feet, his body aching from the impact of the magical force she'd used against him. He glanced around the shrine, looking for any escape route. The entrance was still blocked by Amara, her presence dominating the space like a malevolent storm. But then his eyes fell on the small altar of Ovia, the one he had helped maintain over the years. An idea formed in his mind. The altar had been a place of reverence for the river god, a symbol of the village's deep connection to the divine forces of nature. Perhaps he could appeal to Ovia for help. After all, the river god had blessed Nadasi, and Amara's corrupt magic was not something Ovia would support. Obina quickly made his move. Clutching the bundle of herbs tightly in one hand, he bolted toward the altar, hoping to reach it before Amara could react. Amara's eyes flashed with anger as she realized his intention. "You fool," she hissed, raising her arms to summon another wave of dark magic. Obina barely had time to reach the altar when a blast of energy struck the ground beside him, sending shards of stone flying into the air. He stumbled but managed to place the bundle of herbs on the altar. With a quick prayer to Ovia, he called out, "Ovia, great guardian of the river, protector of the village, hear me. Your priestess has betrayed you. Help me stop her before she destroys everything you have blessed." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The shrine seemed to hold its breath, the very air heavy with tension. Amara's mocking laughter echoed through the space. "Ovia will not answer you, Obina. You are wasting your time." But as the words left her lips, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. A low, rumbling sound filled the shrine, and the air grew thick with a sudden, overwhelming presence. The altar of Ovia began to glow, a soft but unmistakable light emanating from the stone surface where the herbs now lay. Amara's laughter died in her throat, her eyes widening in shock. "No, it can't be." The light from the altar grew brighter, filling the entire shrine with a warm, golden radiance. Obina felt the presence of the river god wash over him, filling him with a sense of calm and strength. He knew then that Ovia had heard his plea. Amara stepped back, her confidence crumbling as she realized the full extent of her mistake. "This isn't possible," she snarled, her voice shaking with fear and disbelief. "I am Ovia's chosen priestess. I am the one in control." But Ovia's presence was undeniable now, and the god's power surged through the shrine, sweeping away the darkness that Amara had brought with her. The symbols of dark magic that had tainted the space began to dissolve, and the air cleared of the foul stench of corruption. Obina stood tall, empowered by Ovia's light. "Your time is over, Amara. The village will know the truth." Amara's face twisted in rage. She unleashed one final blast of magic, a desperate attempt to regain control. But this time, Ovia's power shielded Obinna, and the dark energy dissipated before it could reach him. Realizing she had lost, Amara turned and fled from the shrine, her footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. Obinna watched her go, knowing that her influence was broken, but also knowing that she would not give up easily. She would be back, of that he was certain. But for now, the immediate threat was gone, and Obinna had what he needed to expose Amara's treachery. The following morning, Obinna gathered the elders and the villagers in the center of the village. Word had spread quickly about the events at the shrine, and a sense of anticipation hung in the air. People whispered nervously, their eyes flicking from Obinna to Ijeoma and Nadazi, who stood by his side. Obinna held the bundle of herbs aloft, showing the villagers the dark symbols and the remnants of Amara's magic. "This is what was hidden in the shrine," he began, his voice loud and clear. "Amara has been using dark magic to poison the river and to turn you against Nadazi. She wanted you to believe that he was the cause of the village's suffering, but in truth, it was her all along." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The villagers exchanged shocked glances, unable to believe what they were hearing. The elder who had spoken to Obinna before stepped forward, his face grave. "Is this true, Obinna? Are you certain?" Obinna nodded. "I witnessed it myself. I called upon Ovia, and the river god answered. Amara's magic was undone, and she fled the shrine. She has been manipulating us all, using fear to control the village." The elder looked down at the bundle of herbs, his expression grim. "Amara's betrayal is a great offense to the gods. We must act swiftly to prevent further harm." One of the younger villagers stepped forward, his voice trembling with outrage. "She poisoned our river, turned us against our own. We cannot let her get away with this." A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd, and the villagers began to rally around Obinna and Ijeoma. The tide had turned, Amara's grip on the village had been broken, and the people were ready to take action. But Obinna held up his hand, calling for calm. "We will find her, but we must not let anger guide us. We will seek justice, not vengeance." The elder nodded in agreement. "Yes. We will consult with the gods and decide her fate. In the meantime, we must restore the river and cleanse the village of the harm she has caused." Obinna felt a sense of relief wash over him. The truth was out, and the village was united once more. But he knew that the journey was not over. Amara was still out there, and as long as she remained a threat, they could not rest easy. The search for Amara began that same day. The villagers, led by the elders and Obinna, combed the area surrounding the village, searching for any sign of her. They scoured the forests, the riverbanks, and even the hidden paths that led deeper into the land. Days passed, but there was no trace of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the remnants of her dark magic. As the search continued, Ijeoma remained vigilant, her heart heavy with worry. She knew that Amara would not give up easily. The priestess had tasted power, and she would not let it go without a fight. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the village, Ijeoma sat outside her hut, watching Nadazi play with the other children. Despite the dangers they still faced, there was hope in the air, a feeling that they had overcome the worst. But deep down, Ijeoma knew that the battle was not yet over. Amara was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. And when that moment came, Ijeoma would be ready. Weeks passed, and life in the village began to return to normal. The river, once poisoned by Amara's magic, was healing. The water was clear again, and the fish had returned. The villagers, no longer living under the shadow of fear, went about their daily routines with renewed energy. But despite the calm, Obinna and Ijeoma remained on high alert. They had not forgotten Amara's threat, and they knew that her return was inevitable. Late one night, as the village slept peacefully, Ijeoma awoke with a start. A strange feeling had crept over her, a sense of unease that she couldn't shake. She slipped out of bed and stepped outside, her eyes scanning the darkened village. In the distance, near the edge of the forest, she saw it, a faint, flickering light, moving through the trees. Her heart raced. Could it be Amara? Was this the moment they had been waiting for? Without hesitation, Ijeoma rushed to wake Obinna. "She's here," she whispered urgently. "Amara is back." Obinna's eyes snapped open, and he was on his feet in an instant. "Where?" he asked, his voice low and tense. Ijeoma pointed toward the forest. "There, near the trees. I saw a light moving." Obinna grabbed his spear and nodded. "Stay with Natazi. I'll gather the others." But Ijeoma shook her head. "No. I'm coming with you. We face this together." Obinna hesitated for a moment, but he knew better than to argue. Together, they set off into the night, determined to end this once and for all. The flickering light led them deeper into the forest, where the trees grew thick and the air was heavy with tension. Obinna and Ijeoma moved cautiously, their steps quiet on the forest floor as they followed the faint glow. The moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows through the dense canopy of trees. The flickering light was elusive, dancing just out of reach, as if beckoning them into the heart of the forest. Ijeoma's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the tension in the air, the calm before the storm. This was it, the final confrontation they had been dreading yet preparing for. They were no longer just protecting Natazi, they were safeguarding the entire village from the threat Amara posed. As they neared a clearing, the flickering light vanished, plunging them into darkness. Obinna raised his spear, his senses heightened, scanning the surroundings for any sign of Amara. The air was still, unnaturally so, and a thick fog began to rise from the ground, swirling around them like a living thing. "I know you're here, Amara," Obinna called out, his voice steady. "Show yourself." For a moment, there was silence. Then, from the edge of the clearing, Amara's voice echoed, filled with malice. "You're brave, Obinna, but foolish. You've meddled in powers you cannot comprehend." The fog parted, revealing Amara standing at the far end of the clearing. She looked different now, her once beautiful features were twisted with anger and desperation, and her eyes glowed with an unnatural light. Her hands crackled with dark energy, ready to unleash at a moment's notice. "You should have stayed in the village, living your simple life," she continued, her voice dripping with contempt. "But now, you've left me no choice." Obinna tightened his grip on his spear, positioning himself between Ijeoma and Amara. "You've poisoned the village, turned us against each other. This ends tonight." Amara's lips curled into a cruel smile. "You think you can stop me? Even Ovia's favor won't save you now." Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet, and the trees around them groaned as if in pain. Dark vines, imbued with Amara's corrupt magic, erupted from the earth, twisting and writhing as they lashed out toward Obinna and Ijeoma. Obinna raised his spear and slashed through the nearest vines, but more kept coming, faster and more vicious. Ijeoma, standing just behind him, raised her hands toward the sky. She had never fully mastered her connection to Ovia, but in that moment, she felt a deep well of strength within her. Closing her eyes, she whispered a prayer to the river god, calling on Ovia to protect them, to help them stop Amara once and for all. A soft breeze swept through the clearing, and the sound of rushing water filled the air. The ground beneath Ijeoma's feet began to shimmer with a faint blue light, and suddenly, a wave of pure, cleansing water surged from the earth. It crashed into the vines, washing them away and clearing a path toward Amara. Amara's face twisted in fury as she saw her magic being undone by the power of Ovia. She screamed in rage and unleashed a torrent of dark energy toward Obinna and Ijeoma, the force of it enough to tear through the trees and shake the ground. But Obinna and Ijeoma stood firm, their connection to Ovia giving them the strength they needed to withstand the attack. Obinna raised his spear, now glowing with the light of the river god's blessing, and hurled it toward Amara with all his might. The spear cut through the air, glowing brighter as it neared its target. Amara tried to summon a shield of dark magic, but it was too late. The spear struck her in the chest, and a burst of blinding light filled the clearing as the corrupt energy within her was torn apart. Amara let out a final, anguished scream as the power she had stolen from Ovia consumed her. The dark magic that had once controlled her disintegrated into the night, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Amara collapsed to the ground, her body limp and lifeless. Obinna and Ijeoma stood still, their hearts racing as the last remnants of Amara's dark presence faded. The clearing, once filled with malevolent energy, now felt peaceful. The fog lifted, and the stars overhead twinkled brightly, as if the very sky had been cleansed. Obinna slowly approached Amara's fallen body. There was no sign of the dark magic that had once controlled her, only a broken woman, lost to her own greed and desire for power. "It's over," Obinna said quietly, his voice filled with a mix of relief and sorrow. Ijeoma stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We did what we had to do. The village is safe now." Obinna nodded, though his heart was heavy. He had once considered Amara a friend, and seeing her like this was a painful reminder of what power could do to even the best of people. The village woke to the news of Amara's defeat, and the relief was palpable. The people, who had once feared the corruption that had tainted their river and their lives, now rejoiced in the return of peace. Obinna and Ijeoma were hailed as heroes, not just for their bravery, but for their unwavering belief in the power of the gods and the strength of their community. The village elders declared a day of celebration, offering thanks to Ovia for protecting them and ensuring the village's prosperity once more. The river, now fully restored, sparkled under the morning sun, its waters clear and full of life. The villagers gathered at its banks, singing songs of gratitude and renewal. As the celebrations continued, Obinna and Ijeoma stood by the river, watching Nadazi play with the other children. They knew that their journey wasn't over, there would always be challenges to face, and they would face them together, just as they had always done. Obinna looked out at the river, the place where it had all begun. "Do you think she'll ever find peace?" he asked, referring to Amara. Ijeoma was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I hope so. Perhaps in the next life, she'll find the peace she couldn't find here." Obinna smiled, though there was still a lingering sadness in his eyes. Perhaps. But as they stood there, surrounded by the sound of laughter and the sight of their village healing, they knew one thing for certain: whatever came next, they would face it together, with the strength of their ancestors, their community, and the gods guiding them forward. Years passed after Amara's defeat, and the village of Omire continued to thrive under the protection of Ovia, the river god. But the villagers knew that something more profound was taking place. A quiet power was growing, unnoticed by many but felt by the earth, the waters, and the skies. It was Nadazi, the child born of both the mortal and the divine, whose destiny had been foretold. Nadazi had grown into a strong and wise boy. Though still young, he possessed a calm and serene nature that drew people to him. His connection to the river and the spirits that guarded it was evident in the way animals followed him, how the water always seemed to shimmer when he approached, and how the fish swam toward him, as though they recognized him as one of their own. Yet, Nadazi had not yet fully realized his powers, and the village still wondered what his role would be in its future. One fateful day, a severe drought struck the region. The sun scorched the earth, and the once lush fields began to wither. The river, too, began to recede, its waters drying up under the relentless heat. The villagers were afraid, without the river, they would starve, and their livelihoods would be lost. Obinna and Ijeoma, now respected elders in the community, saw the fear in the eyes of the villagers. They knew the time had come for Nadazi to fulfill the prophecy that had been whispered since the day of his birth. "Nadazi," Obinna said gently, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "The river is in danger, and so is our village. I believe it is time for you to embrace who you are and what you are meant to do." Nadazi looked at his father, uncertainty in his young eyes. "But what if I'm not ready?" Ijeoma knelt beside him, her eyes filled with love. "You are ready, my son. You've always been ready. The river has been waiting for you. Trust in yourself, and trust in Ovia." Taking a deep breath, Nadazi nodded. He had always felt a strange connection to the river, but now, he felt its call more strongly than ever before. It was as if the waters themselves were crying out to him, pleading for his help. Nadazi stood at the banks of the river, the dry, cracked earth beneath his feet. The village elders and all the people of Omire had gathered to witness what would happen. They watched in silence as Nadazi closed his eyes and raised his hands toward the sky. At first, nothing happened. The air was still, and the river remained a trickle. But then, a low rumble came from deep within the earth. The ground beneath the riverbed began to shake, and a soft glow emanated from the water's edge. The villagers gasped as Nadizi's body began to shimmer with the same ethereal light. His eyes glowed a soft blue, the same color as the river's sacred waters, and a rush of energy flowed through him. He could feel the river's life force pulsing in his veins, and with it, the spirits of the water that had long protected Omire. They spoke to him, ancient and wise, guiding him in what he needed to do. Nadizi opened his eyes and looked at the water, no longer afraid. "Ovia," he whispered, "I am your son. Let the river flow again." As if in response, the heavens opened. Rain began to fall, not in the usual heavy torrents of a storm, but in a soft, steady shower that soaked the earth. The villagers, who had been watching in awe, felt the cool droplets on their skin, their hearts lifting with hope. But that was not all. The river, which had been reduced to a mere stream, began to surge. Its waters, once brown and sluggish, now ran clear and pure. Fish leaped joyfully in the water, and the plants along the riverbank began to bloom once more, their leaves green and vibrant. The drought was over. Nadizi lowered his hands, the light around him fading as the rain continued to fall. The villagers, overcome with joy, rushed forward, cheering and praising Ovia. They embraced Nadizi, recognizing him as more than just a child of their village. He was the bridge between them and the divine, a protector, just as his mother and father had always known he would be. In the days that followed, the village of Omire experienced an abundance it had never known before. Crops flourished, and the fish in the river seemed endless. The villagers no longer feared drought or hardship, for they knew that Nadizi, with his connection to Ovia, would always watch over them. As he grew older, Nadizi's powers matured. He could communicate with the spirits of the water, predict changes in the weather, and even heal the sick by using the river's sacred waters. His wisdom far exceeded his years, and people from neighboring villages came to seek his guidance. Though Nadizi was the child of Ovia, he remained humble, always remembering the lessons his parents had taught him about kindness, generosity, and responsibility. He understood that his powers were a gift, not to be taken lightly or used for selfish gain. And with that understanding, he ensured that Omire remained a place of harmony and prosperity. One day, as the village prepared for its annual festival to honor Ovia, Obinna and Ijeoma sat by the river, watching their son. He stood at the water's edge, speaking softly to the river as he often did. "He's become everything we hoped he would be," Ijeoma said, her voice filled with pride. Obinna smiled, his heart swelling with love for his son. And more. As the festival began and the villagers danced and sang in celebration, Nadizi stood at the center of it all, a symbol of the village's bond with the divine. He had fulfilled the prophecy, but more importantly, he had brought peace, balance, and prosperity to his people. And though his journey was far from over, one thing was certain: the village of Omire would never face darkness again, as long as the child of Ovia walked among them. The moral of the entire story is that true power lies in humility, responsibility, and embracing one's destiny with grace. Both Ijeoma and Nadizi show that even when faced with the unknown, courage and selflessness can overcome fear and hardship. Greed and envy lead to downfall, while unity and service to the community bring lasting prosperity. In the end, our greatest strength comes from our connection to others and the balance we maintain with nature and the divine.